You know, there's a multi-billion-dollar mystery unfolding every single day out on the high seas. It's this invisible force that's slowing down global trade and costing the shipping industry a fortune. Today, we're going to crack the case of the slowing ship.
So here's a question for you. What could a massive 400-meter cargo ship and an elite marathon runner possibly have in common? Well, it turns out a lot more than you'd think. Just like an athlete, a ship has a peak fitness level, but over time it can get out of shape and it starts to slow down. The cause? An invisible enemy we need to uncover.
All right, let's dive into our first section. We need to identify the culprit here, this massive invisible force that's putting the brakes on global trade, one ship at a time.
So why do these incredible machines, these giant steel structures built to take on the toughest oceans, get out of shape? It's not what you might think. It's not rust, it's not engine trouble, it's actually something alive.
You see, when a ship is brand new, its hull is perfectly smooth, designed for peak performance. But the second it touches the water, the ocean starts to attack. First, a thin layer of slime and algae forms. Then that grows into weeds and barnacles. This whole process, called biofouling, acts like a constant brake on the ship, creating a massive energy drain.
And that energy drain has a very real, very high cost. For just one ship, a bad hull condition can mean wasting over $1,500 on fuel every single day. Now multiply that by the thousands of ships in the global fleet, and you've got a colossal problem, not just for the bottom line, but for the environment too.
So, how do we fight back against this invisible enemy? Well, like any good performance coach would tell you, it all starts with measurement. Let's take a look at how experts track this performance gap.
The single most important metric is something called the performance penalty. To put it simply, it's the extra power the ship's engine has to generate today just to hit the same speed it could when it was brand new. And this is a pure measure of inefficiency, because it's calculated after they've already corrected for things like wind and waves.
Calculating it is a pretty straightforward four-step process. First, you record the daily power and speed. Second, you adjust that data for the weather to get what's called a calm water number. Third, you compare that to the ship's personal best, its peak performance right out of the shipyard. And that difference, that gap that's left over, that's the performance penalty.
Okay, now for the detective work. Once we start tracking this penalty over time, the data gives us two really distinct clues that tell us completely different stories about the ship's health. When you look at the data, two patterns emerge. The first is this slow, steady, upward creep. That's the speed-power shift. It's the ship's new normal as it ages, a permanent decline. The second is a really noisy, spiky signal that jumps all over the place. That shows excess power, the daily deviation caused by temporary problems like a sudden algae bloom. One tracks long-term health, the other tracks short-term issues.
Yeah, this really puts it perfectly. The speed-power shift is the new baseline. That's just the ship getting older, and that's a fact of life. The excess power is all the daily noise and chaos around that baseline, the day-to-day problems that pop up and need to be managed.
Data is incredibly powerful, right? But you can't really make multi-million-dollar decisions based on a squiggly line on a chart. So let's see how managers turn these abstract signals into simple, actionable numbers. So we start with the raw data. In this example, our analysis shows a performance penalty of 450 kilowatts. That's the extra power this ship is constantly burning. But what does that really mean? It's just a number. Well, for a manager, percentages are a lot clearer. That 450 kilowatts translates directly to an 8% loss in efficiency. Now we're getting somewhere. This is a clear key performance indicator, a KPI. It tells you the ship is working 8% harder than it's supposed to.
Okay, so what does an 8% loss in efficiency mean for the fuel tank? It means this ship is burning an extra 2.5 tons of fuel every single day just to fight that friction on its hull.
And finally, we get to the bottom line. That extra fuel is costing the company over $1,500 every single day. Now, the problem isn't some abstract technical thing anymore. It's a direct financial bleed that demands attention.
Now, to put that 8% loss into context, here are some typical industry benchmarks. A really well-maintained hull might only lose about 1 to 2% in performance a year. A normal rate of decay is somewhere between 2 and 6%. Our ship, at 8%, is squarely in the severe category. That number is basically a big red flag telling the operator that action is needed, and soon.
So what is the payoff for all this analysis?
Well, armed with this kind of data, operators can finally stop guessing. They can start making smarter, more profitable, and ultimately much more sustainable decisions.
This data drives a very clear 5-year maintenance cycle. Right after leaving dry dock, performance is at its peak. Then it slowly degrades for a couple of years. A proactive cleaning around the 2.5-year mark can give it a nice boost, partially resetting performance. But by year 4, the data is showing severe degradation, signaling it's time to book the next dry dock for year 5. Then the whole cycle just starts all over again.
And this data empowers real-world, high-stakes decisions. Now you can actually justify the cost of a hull cleaning with hard numbers. You can optimize the timing of a multi-million-dollar dry dock, not too early, not too late. You can even run tests to see which expensive anti-fouling paints actually work the best. In short, it turns maintenance from a guessing game into a data-driven strategy.
And that brings us to our final thought. This isn't just about ships, is it? It's about using data to find and fix hidden performance gaps anywhere. If we can measure the fitness of a massive cargo ship, what other invisible drags on efficiency, in our businesses, in our supply chains, or maybe even in our own daily lives, could data finally help us solve?